Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2024-25 new coordinator training from the California Department of Education. Um, we are here to hopefully provide some guidance, some support, and hopefully teach you a few things that you could use to be successful in your new role. My name is Paul Valencia, and I will be your producer for today's webinar, which is a focus on the resources for student practice. Before we hand it off to our very knowledgeable presenters, let's address a few housekeeping items. First, all participants are muted. Therefore, in order to submit your questions during the presentation, you may use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Please do not confuse this with the chat feature. For this webinar series, we are using the Q&A feature only. Second, a copy of today's resource guide was sent to you via email. If you haven't received it or need to access it again, the link has been placed in the chat, and I will drop it in here right now. Clicking on the link will take you to a folder where you can download the guide or make a copy into your own Google Drive. There is no edit access from the link we shared, so therefore you're going to have to save your own copy first, okay? And lastly, we will be recording today's presentation. An archive of this presentation will be available to view on the upcoming and on-demand trainings webpage on the CAASPP and ELPAC website. All righty, with that, I would like to introduce today's expert panelists. We're very fortunate to have with us today Aaron Gordon from San Diego County Office of Education and Joe Valero from Fresno County Superintendent of Schools.
All right, thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everybody. Joe Valero from the Office of the Fresno County Superintendent of Schools. So let's talk about our agenda. So today our agenda aligns with the success criteria for this webinar. So let's take a look at the things we will be able to understand and do at the end of each section. So today you will be able to understand why student practice is so important, prepare practice and training tests, understand the importance of interim assessments, assign some homework, and get answers to your questions. We also want to take a minute to talk through the format of the new coordinator trainings for the 2024-25 school year. The following pieces are included in the new coordinator training as asynchronous or on-demand pre-work. The pre-work is optional and is meant for those who need additional information. Here's the thing, even me, I go back and I still, as many years as we've been doing it, I go back and I'm always accessing those resources. So, not just for new coordinators. The pre-work includes a video on resources, which covers agencies, websites, manuals, flyers, and other deliverables to support coordinators. A video about the coordinator role, which covers the LEA coordinator, as well as site level and test administrator levels. And the introduction to SIRS trainings, which take place in summer and fall. We've transitioned to the new coordinator trainings from full day in-person sessions to a webinar format. This change allows us, this change allows us to provide more flexible and accessible training. The webinar format enables us to offer personalized support and deliver valuable insights to coordinators at the times they need them most. We believe this expanded structure will greatly enhance the quality of learning by accommodating various schedules and tailoring the training experience to better meet the needs of new coordinators. The rest of the new coordinator training program is a series of monthly webinars designed to give just-in-time information. These 12 webinars will spread across the year. The full list of sessions is in the resource guide, but let's review today and what is coming in the next few months. So today we are focusing on student practice. This is going to help with students and staff prepare for testing, gain familiarity with the testing platform, become more comfortable with the different item types, and understand how to navigate within the system. The training in November will be a webinar on preparing for testing. And then in December, we'll continue with preparing to test. So that'll be part 2. Think about JAWS part 1, JAWS part 2. Maybe we'll have a part 3 down the road, right? I think that they go to 4 JAWS. I'm not quite sure. All right, so let's talk about coordinator checklists. Before we jump into today's topic, we want to remind everyone about a few excellent resources for coordinators. Links to these resources are in your resource guide. The first are the coordinator checklists. There is one checklist for each program for LEA coordinators, as well as checklists for the other roles. Each checklist includes an extensive list of the tasks and activities that are part of your new role. The tasks are listed by the month in which they are most likely to occur, but some tasks may occur in other months, depending on your local schedules and plans. They are created in Microsoft Word, where you can customize them to better meet your needs at your LEA. The second is the new Coordinator How-To Hub. This is a page on the CAASPP and ELPAC website that collects all existing how-to resources, including videos from other LEA coordinators, and organizes them by time and by topic. If you're ever stuck on how to do something, it's a great place to start. You'll see some really good how-to videos and how other people are going over and completing some of the tasks. All right, so let's start with the why to help us understand the importance of student practice. Practice is practice is an important piece in preparing students and staff for testing. By utilizing available resources, students and staff gain familiarity with the testing platform, become more comfortable with the different item types, and understand how to navigate within the system. This was honestly what I was working on this morning in a district. It was the different item types, and just once again, not letting it be a test of the testing platform, but a test of content knowledge. We don't want students to be, caught off guard with the platform itself. It's good to build familiarity with the testing system once again prior to summative testing. We don't want it to be, 2 weeks before. Students with designated supports and accommodations can test their utility and learn how to use those embedded tools to ensure fair and valid testing. Practice also gives all students the opportunity to become familiar with universal tools. Practice will reduce the number of system usage errors and security and administration incidents, reduce apprehension of the process, reduce test anxiety in students, and provide for a smoother summative testing experience. There are resources for student practice that are available to students, teachers, parents, and administrators, so anyone can practice, not just students. So let's start with practice tests and training tests as a resource for student practice. Practice tests. So the goal of the practice tests is to expose students, parents, teachers, and test administrators or examiners to the tests so they may become familiar with the format and the structure of the summative assessments. Practice tests provide students with the opportunity to experience CAASPP or ELPAC at each grade level or grade level span that's tested. Scoring guides are available for the practice tests, but the tests themselves are not automatically scored, regardless of how they're administered. The practice and training tests contain embedded universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations that are part of the online test administration system. And that's in order to provide students with grade level subject specific experiences for them to use. Also, please keep in mind, students can log in using their SSID or as a guest to access the practice and training tests. The goal of the training tests is to allow students to become familiar with the testing interface and available accessibility resources. There are fewer items on the training tests than the practice tests. There are no scoring guides available for the training tests. The training tests are available for grade spans rather than individual grade levels. Students can, however, practice using accessibility resources. So let's talk about availability. Practice and training tests are available for Smarter Balanced Summative Assessments for English Language Arts, Literacy, or ELA, and Mathematics. the California Science Test, or CAST, California Alternate Assessments, or CAAs for ELA, Mathematics and Science, California Spanish Assessment, or CSA, summative ELPAC, where there is one per domain for the same grade levels and grade spans as the summative ELPAC, and the summative alternate ELPAC. So lots of great resources out there that are available. There are resources available to support you in administering a practice test. In your resource guide are the links to the quick reference guides. Sometimes you'll hear those referred to as QRGs, or once again, quick reference guides. These guides walk you through the process of accessing the practice tests. There are also scoring guides available for the practice tests. The practice tests are not scored automatically, once again, like we said earlier, but hand scoring is an option. Scoring guides provide details about the test items, student response types, correct responses. That's always an important one. We all act like I like to go over and just say, hey, we're all going to act like we don't know the answer. Let's go to the guides. And how test items align with state standards. Answer keys and rubrics for performance tasks and constructed response items are also available. All these resources can be valuable for teachers, administrators, and users in the system. The ELPAC practice test can be given online, or a PDF version of each test is available for download at the ELPAC website. So as a reminder, the link to these resources are in your resource guide. So let's talk about taking a practice or training tests. Students can take a practice or training test at school or at home in an unmonitored environment. They can take it anywhere as long as it's, they have access to internet. Or the teacher may launch a test session and have students access the test through the secure browser. By practicing the logon and approval process, both the teacher and the students gain experience together with the testing platform. It's best to have the students practice using the secure browser that they will be using during summative testing. For the CAAs and alternate ELPAC, administration is one-on-one using the directions for administration, which you'll probably hear called the DFAs. Again, the practice tests are not scored automatically, but hand scoring is an option with the scoring guides, answer keys, and rubrics available to provide details on the test items, student response types, correct responses, and alignment with state standards. Once again, making them valuable resources for teachers, students, and educators. And with that, I am going to turn this over to my colleague, Erin.
All right. It never fails. I can never find the mute. Is that still to this day? Oh my goodness. Thank you, Joe. So I'm Erin Gordon from San Diego County Office of Ed, and I am so excited because I have to say the interims are probably one of my favorite subjects to talk about. So our next resource we're talking about is the interim assessments. And Joe did a beautiful job talking about the practice and training tests. And so switching from that student practice with the online system to actually assessing content. And we'll find that the interim assessments, we can assess content.
And I'm going to stop you really quickly.
Yeah.
So you're sharing your...
oh, no.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, good thing I was ad-libbing, huh?
I know.
Right.
It's like the Wizard of Oz. Never mind what we're all seeing here.
I know. Okay, am I sharing the screen now?
Good. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you. Thank you for catching that, Joe. So interim assessments, we can assess content, but we also, just like the student practice and training tests, we also can benefit from getting familiar, students and teachers getting familiar with the interface before the end of the year summative assessments. So let's move forward. Okay. Before we dive in, we do want to mention, I call them the guardrails. We have security and ed code that kind of govern and give us some parameters when we use the interim assessments. So first, we have the California Education Code. And it's in your resource guide. So it's section 60642.7B for those of you that want to look it up. It prohibits the use of interim assessments for any high stakes purposes like course placement, identification for GATE, so gifted or talented, or even reclassification of English learners. So we are prohibited from using the interim assessments for these high stakes purposes. Another important note is that the interim assessments are copyrighted, so they may not be posted into third-party platforms such as Google Classroom or Canvas or any other learning management system or reporting system that you might have in your local, in your LEA. And so the interims may only be used with the systems provided by the CDE. The interim assessments, they're secure. They require a TOMS or Test Operation Management Systems login. And so keep that in mind. Interims are student and teacher facing only. And I would expand that, not just teachers, but educator facing. So it's important that we keep this in mind as we go through. Now, let's start with the purpose of the interim assessments. Interim assessments, they're free. They're free resources that can inform and support teaching and learning in multiple ways. Their intended purpose is to evaluate student knowledge and skills during the year. And one of the biggest benefits of the interim assessments is their flexibility. I think that's why I like the interim assessments so much, because they're versatile in their use. They can be used as assessments for learning, and they can be used as assessments of learning. So as we continue to discuss the features of the interims, think about in your own local context where the interims might fit. Now, there's several reasons why we want to use the interim assessments. And Joe and I are like the biggest advocates for use of the interim assessments. So the interim use, the interims use the same exact testing interface, same types of items, and then the same accessibility resources that are available on the summative assessments. The interims can be used to inform progress towards mastery of standards, but also to experience those item types and familiarize students and teachers with the testing interface and the accessibility resources. So very powerful. And they can be used with professional learning tools for educators to build their own knowledge and capacity. There's available resources that teachers can become more familiar with the content being assessed, the item types that students will encounter. Even the rubrics and the scoring criteria can be a real just valuable professional learning tool to be used with teachers. So there's just so much that the interims bring. And then with the interims, educators can access item level information in CERS, our California Educator Reporting System. You can drill down to the item level. You can actually see student responses and the correct answers. So you can't do that with the summative assessments. But with the interims, you are able to drill down. There's a wonderful report called the Distractor Analysis Report that many educators use with the interim assessment results. Also, the item information, we call it metadata, such as the standard, claim, and target alignment. And then you also can drill down and see the depth of knowledge being assessed, the item difficulty. So there's a lot of valuable information that you can get from the interim assessment results in CERS. And then finally, tools for teachers. You can use in tandem with the interim assessment results to provide teachers with instructional resources that are based on the content of the specific Smarter Balanced interim assessment blocks, so the IABs. So there's just a lot. We could spend hours on this topic, but obviously we don't have that much time. And speaking of blocks, let's dig into how interim assessments are organized. So there's different types. And for the Smarter Balanced assessments for ELA and math, they're organized by content they assess. So first we have the interim comprehensive assessments, the ICAs, which test the same content and report scores on the same scale as the summative assessments. But I do need to there's a caveat here with use of the interim comprehensive assessments. So with the new Smarter Balanced Adjusted form, the ICAs will actually take longer than the summative to administer because they use the full form blueprints. So keep that in mind. The ICAs can be administered up to 3 times a year. And each ICA includes 1 or more items that require hand scoring. So you want to keep that in mind as well. But they are longer than our summative assessments, now that our summative assessments use the shortened blueprint. Now you'll see in the slide, this is represented as a cube with all the blocks shaded, okay? Because it's representing the content being assessed. Now, interim assessment blocks, or our IABs, these are probably the most popular along with the focused IABs. The IABs focus on smaller sets of related concepts, and they provide much more detailed information for instructional purposes. Generally have 6 to 18 items and can be administered in one class period, 45 minutes to 60 minutes. They could be administered an unlimited number of times, but all of our interims are fixed form, and there's only one of these IABs for the Smarter Balanced IABs. So it's important if you're going to administer more than one time with the same IAB, because we want to avoid overexposure to the items. So just a caution, knowing that it's the fixed form, so it's not computer adaptive. So students would be exposed to the same items. We can see in the middle cube, or we have this cube with 8 blocks shaded in, representing the IAB. And our last type of interim assessment for Smarter Balanced is the focused IAB, or FIABs as we call them. And they assess even smaller chunks of content, generally 1 to 3 assessment targets. They have about 10 to 15 items focused on very specific concepts. And this is represented as a cube with just the 2 blocks shaded in. All of the Smarter Balanced interim assessments contain high quality test items. They're developed in the same way as those that we see on the summative assessments. Now, some of the questions are machine scored. However, there are some questions, such as the constructed response items and the performance tasks that need to be hand scored locally. All right, well, let's move on to CAST. So as we all know, a year ago, so we're in year 2 of our CAST interim assessments, and they're offered from grades 3 through high school. This ensures that students across different age groups have access to these assessments. There's a total of 18 CAST interim assessments available beginning this year. And the CAST interim assessments, they're organized in 2 ways. So in elementary, they're organized by grade level performance expectations. So the CAST IAs for grades 3, 4, and 5 assess all 3 of the science domains. So we have earth and space sciences, life sciences, and physical sciences. Then in middle school and in high school, the CAST IAs are organized by science domains. So there are 6 middle school and 6 high school CAST IAs, and they each assess 1 science domain. So there's going to be earth and space sciences. So for middle school, there'll be 2 of those. Life sciences, there'll be 2 at middle school, and then 2 at high school, and then physical sciences, the same. There's a list in your resource guide, so it's really easy to see what's available. Each interim for science includes one performance task with a constructed response item. So it does require hand scoring. And those scores, I just want to point out that you have to score and submit those before the results appear in SIRS. So keep that in mind. Again, check out the list in your resource guide because it lists all of the available CAASPP IAs. And then now we have the last of our interim assessment types is our ELPAC interim assessments. Similar to the CAASPP, this is our second year, and there are now 56 assessments available for the ELPAC interim assessments. Speaking and writing are locally hand scored by educators. And then reading and listening are computer scored. The ELPAC interim assessments are administered online to students, except for kindergarten through grade 2, the writing domain. That's administered on paper. Each interim includes about half the items on the summative ELPAC, with all summative task types covered between interim 1 and interim 2. And the ELPAC interim assessments align with the 2012 California English Language Development Standards. All right, so how they're organized, there's 2 interim assessments for ELPAC. It's 2 different forms for each domain at each grade level or grade span. So listening, speaking, reading, and writing, there's 2 for each of those domains at each of our grade or grade spans. Form 1 was released last year in 2023-24. That included 28 interim assessments. And then Form 2 was released this year with an additional 28 interim assessments. And this way, all teachers, educators have 2 interim assessments to choose from for each grade or grade span for each domain. And again, there's a table in your resource guide that lists the number of items per domain per grade to show the number of items on each interim assessment. All right, so I already mentioned one of the biggest benefits of the interim assessments is their flexibility. The interim assessments may be administered at any grade level to any student. So teachers can administer an interim assessment from any grade level. An example of that, if I were teaching 9th grade, I could give my 9th graders in the beginning of the year maybe an IAB that's an 8th grade IAB. So I could use a different grade level with my students. You don't have that flexibility with the summative assessments. The interim assessments may be administered in a standardized or non-standardized way. And so what we mean by that is a standardized administration is when interims are administered in the same way that the summative is administered. So students are taking the assessment independently. A non-standardized administration means it might look like students working on test items with other students in pairs or small groups, or a teacher might even lead a whole group class lesson while displaying an interim test item on the board, and or having students work on a performance task together. So that's more of a non-standardized manner of administration. And this provides educators with that flexibility to use the interim assessments, as best that meets their instructional needs in their classrooms. And even though we do have the flexibility, remember we mentioned there are those parameters. As we discussed, the interim assessments cannot be used for high stakes purposes, such as, the reclassification of English learners or course placement. The interim assessments are copyrighted, so you can't post those into third-party platforms. And you have to use the interims within the systems provided by the CDE. And then just remember that the interim assessments are student and teacher facing only. So you wouldn't be able to share a parent-teacher with parents. You can't share the interim assessment items, but you can share the results with parents. So now there are so many resources, and there are links in your resource guide to all of these resources. First, the new interim assessment lookup tool. This is an excellent tool. What they've done is there was an interim assessment at a glance and a grade, interim assessment by grade PDF that used to exist. And now they've combined those in a dynamic web page that includes all the interim assessments available for the current school year. And there are filter options. You can filter by content area, grade, and the tests that require hand scoring. So it's a really powerful tool. It really helps with planning. For each grade, it lists the available interim assessment. It includes the name of the assessment, the claim and targets assessed or domains assessed, and the number of items on each test. It also lists the number of items that require hand scoring. So all of these can really help educators plan which interim assessments might be useful at certain times during the year. And another resource are the interim assessment videos. It's actually a video series, and then also the interim assessment user guide. The interim assessment video series consists of a series of 10-minute narrated presentations, and there's also system demonstration videos, and they complement the interim assessment user guide. So those are also useful resources. The interim assessment button on the CAASPP homepage or the ELPAC homepage, that will lead to additional resources. And then finally, the interim assessment viewing system is a great resource. It's available to teachers with a TOM. You need a TOMS account, and you log in, and the viewing system allows teachers to view any of the interim assessments at any grade level, and you interact with it as a student would the actual test. So again, another great resource for teachers. The practice and tests, training tests, and the interim assessments can all be used to support teaching and learning in the remote testing environment. And remote testing, that's intended only for students receiving classroom instruction in a remote setting. And for more information about the remote testing for interim assessments, there's a link provided in your resource guide if that pertains to your setting. Okay, so we've talked a lot about interim assessments, and there's a lot of wonderful features. And there's one last thing that we're going to do before we start answering your questions, and that is assign some homework. So we want you to do three things. First, download that coordinator checklist that Joe spoke about earlier if you haven't done so already. We can't emphasize enough how detailed those documents are and how helpful they are. Joe and I, we've been doing this for a while, as Joe said, and we still reference that and use our checklist. The coordinator checklist is kind of our go-to. Second, we want you to explore the resources that we've shared with you in your resource guide and put together a plan to share them out with your sites. And then finally, we want you to find out which of your sites need to add student practice to their plans. Okay, so those are pretty easy things that we're asking you to do. And now I think we are ready to address any questions. And so it looks like Joe has been busy answering some of the questions.
There are. So you know what? So to give you a little bit of a break. I'll take one of the questions that we have answered here. So one of the questions was about key distractor analysis. And so The question was, can you explain distractor analysis a little deeper? And so in a super duper short nutshell, when a student takes a test, it's submitted, if it's multiple choice or multiple select, there's a really great feature in SIRS where it's on a drop down. We can click when we're looking at interim assessment data, key distractor analysis. In green, that's what it's going to shade what the correct answer should be. And then it'll just show us the distribution of scores. So what do we mean by that? Or excuse me, of student responses. What do we mean by that? So if it was a multiple choice question, A, B, C, D, and the correct answer should have been A, that'll be shaded green, really bright. And then it's going to tell us the percentage of students that thought A was the correct answer, B, C, and D. And if we see something wacky in there, let's say that, once again, A was the correct answer, but only 15% of the students thought that A was the correct answer. And for some reason, D, 70% of the students thought D was the correct answer. Well, what you'll be able to do in SIRS is go in, click on the actual item or question, depending on what we want to call them. But you can click on the item, it'll open it up, and we can actually see what the item was and what the individual students were even responding. And so it's being able to go beyond just the what percentage of students were standard, above standard, near standard, or below standard. It's getting into the actual item level analysis and just going over and saying, what are my students really good at? And what might be an area of opportunity? What might we need to go over and focus on, and then just weave it into our instructions? So we linked in the user guide for SIRS that will take you directly there to key distractor analysis. And what I'll do too is I'll put that into the chat, just in case anybody else wants more information about key distractor analysis.
Great, Joe. I see a couple questions in that haven't been addressed yet about the interim assessment viewing system. So this is a real amazing tool, and they've actually added some enhancements to it. It used to be you would log in with your TOMS account and you would interact with it as the student. I mean, it would be as if you're taking the test like a student would. And you used to have to answer the question before going to the next page. So they actually changed that. So now you can kind of flip through and progress and go to different items. What the value with that is, as an educator, you can actually preview the assessment before you administer it. So you really can see the item types. What kind of items are students going to be asked to drag and drop? Are they going to be asked to do a constructed response? Is it a select response where there's more than one correct answer? So it could be really useful for you as a teacher to give you insight, not just the content that's being assessed, but those item types. And again, you can interact with it as even the embedded tools are there, the accessibility tools. So it really gives you a taste into, window into the true testing interface without having to create a test session, log in. And so it gives you direct access to that testing environment. A couple uses, you could project using the interim assessment viewing system, project one of those items up on your smart board and have students as a class go through an item together. And so that's completely okay to do, and that's encouraged to do. So again, the flexibility that we have with many of these resources. And I saw a question about what's the difference between that and then a standard or non-standardized way that you administer an assessment interim. So in the reporting system, and even when you go to create the assessment within the TA interface, you indicate whether the manner of administration is non-standardized or standardized. And you really want to do that because that will be reported in SIRS. And so if you were giving it in a non-standardized way, let's say students were going through the assessment with their buddy and kind of interacting or trying out some accessibility resources and seeing if stat translations really would benefit them. but they weren't really taking the assessment independently. You would indicate non-standardized so that if there are results that are generated for that in SIRS and it's indicated non-standardized, that gives us an indication to view those results knowing that they didn't take it in a standardized way. So that's the whole reason why you would indicate standardized versus non-standardized when you administer the assessment. I hope that clears up a few of those questions.
And I'm going to piggyback on something you were just talking about, Aaron. So it was about the interim assessment viewing system, and so that goes along with one of the questions that I had earlier, which was who has access to it essentially. And so in order to have access to the interim assessment viewing system, the viewing system itself, if you are an LEA coordinator or a site coordinator or test administrator, test examiner, interim assessment only, those roles will have access to the interim assessment viewing system. So they'll have access to be able to get in, view those assessments before they're administered. And then on the flip side, the other question came up about having access to data. And so if you have, and this is for new coordinators here, if you have coordinator access, whether it's LEA or site coordinator, you'll automatically have access in SIRS to the data without needing to manage student groups. You just automatically have access to all the students, either in your LEA or at your site, depending on what the access is inside of TOMS. There was another question we had here. Oh my gosh, I think I lost it. Oh, so a lot of people got excited of Aaron about the interim assessment lookup tool, that brand new one that is available. So we linked it in, and so just in case, I'm going to put it into the chat as well. That really slick lookup tool. So not that I want to sound like old man Valero here, but back when we all first started interim assessments, they were PDFs. And so now this one's a very dynamic site where you can go over, you can toggle, you can go over and just look for items that don't have hand scoring. You can look for ELPAC or science or ELA, you name it, whatever melts your butter. So you can go on ahead and use those filters, and you can look up any assessment you'd like. So once again, we just put that into the chat right here as well. So you'll see that in there for everybody.
And I just answered a question, and just to reiterate, the interim assessments are not, you are not permitted to use for reclassification purposes, criteria 4. So any high stakes purposes, grading, course placement, reclassification, identification for gate, any kinds of anything. It's really for instructional purposes. So not for high stakes. So hopefully that clears that up. And then there's I know, Joe, you already answered this, talking about the perimeters that I call them the guardrails of interim assessments, kind of keeping us within even though there's flexibility, we have the security, right? And we have the ed code prohibiting us from using it in a high stakes way. We also have the security guardrail, which prohibits us from putting these items in Google Classroom or any other learning management system like Canvas, or putting them in an assessment or reporting system like Illuminate. You're not permitted to do that because it is copyrighted and they are secure. So we only can view that in the results or the item level information that we have, or even the items of the test within the systems that CDE has with the TOMS account. So it is secure. And I see that Joe had answered that question already.
Nice. And so there were a couple of questions, Erin, that also came up about just accessing something you were talking about earlier, the interim assessment viewing system. So rather than just put that specific link into the chat, what I really linked in was the link on the CAASPP and ELPAC website that gives you all resources for interim assessments. So the very first button in the link that we just placed in there is the interim assessment viewing system. So once again, you do need Tom's access to be able to get in. So, and here's a really good general rule of thumb. So if you have to use your Tom's user login, test operations management system login to access whatever it is in the system, that's a good indication that it's secure. Those are secure materials. And so that's why when you're using the interim assessment viewing system, you're going to have to put your email address, your login to get into the system. And so, but all the resources are here, including that lookup tool. And so Erin actually
And
on the screen, yeah, I love it. So
okay, so we're on the CAASPP and ELPAC website. Thank you, Joe, for prompting this. I think it's better to show than tell. Show and tell. Let's show. So on the CAASPP and ELPAC, you go to the interim assessment button or tile on the home page, and look at this. This is where you have all of your related systems that we've been talking about. So you have your interim assessment viewing system. You will need your Tom's account to log in. This is where you can create a test session with your TA interface. You can go into Tom's. You have SIRS. So SIRS, you can look at the actual results. So anyway, these are all your related systems. And then if you scroll down, this is our interim assessment lookup tool. So you click on that and it takes you to this amazing tool. The filters by subject are along the side. So if you only want to look up Smarter Balanced interim assessments for ELA, you can click that. You can actually drill down and look at Smarter Balanced at a glance. I prefer the grade level, but I'll show you the glance. This is ELA, so it tells you what all exists for ELA on one kind of screen, and you can see at a glance what is available for each grade level. My preference, and I'll show you, is by grade level. I'll show you grade 3 because it gives you a little bit more detail. Gives you the claim and target alignment, tells you how many items need to be hand scored. So as a teacher, I don't have that much time this week, but I need something that might be around, brief rights or what have you. Maybe I need to administer something else that maybe in a week or so when I have more time to actually score. It also gives me some more insights as to those assessments that don't require hand scoring. If you're new, you might want to get your feet wet with an assessment that doesn't require hand scoring, just to kind of experience it for the first time, less intimidating. So anyway, so looking at content, but also timing, and it really helps you plan out and plot out through the year when you might administer each of the interim assessment blocks. So anyway, I find that really helpful, especially the hand scored and then what is being assessed at a glance. So I'll go back to our PowerPoint.
So actually, it's really funny. So one of the questions that came up, Erin, as you pull back up the presentation, it might be helpful again, just so you know, as we're in the system, trust me, we're not going to go into anything secure. I promise. What is it, Scout's honor? But we got a question over here about are there printable versions of the interim assessment items? And so yes, there is. It is called the interim assessment item portal. And so once again, we won't go over and we won't actually click on it, but the way that I always access it is through the page that Erin is on right now. So if she goes back to the CAASPP and ELPAC, is it in here, Erin? The item portal? I always access it through Tools for Teachers. Oh, there it is actually, never mind. I should have known better, right? So there is the interim assessment item portal. And so even if Erin clicks on it, she won't be able to go in because it's going to prompt her for, see how it's asking her for her single sign-on. So once again, that's going to tell you that the items are secure. So what this is going to allow you to do is you can go in and rather than see, let's say there are 15 items on an assessment, you can actually view it by item and they are printable, but just please keep in mind that they are secure and copyrighted. So we want to be very cautious with, just making sure those aren't being left out in the open. They are secure, but that particular link right there will take you to where you can go over and print the individual items out. That's one place it lives in, right here on the interim assessment, just like Erin said, the tile, the button, whatever we want to call it. And as you scroll down, you'll see it. It also lives in tools for teachers. So I'm always accessing it through tools for teachers, just because I'm usually in a connections playlist or I'm already logged in, and then that's where I'll go in and download those as well. So thank you, Erin, for going over and taking us through there.
Yeah, there's a lot. You saw how long that website, like there's a lot of resources. So, as we've mentioned, there's just so much and really to enhance teaching and learning. And that's what it's all about. So, we love to show and tell. Are there any other questions? Um,
There's some questions about using the data on the FIABs on interim assessments for grades. So with that, I would almost just refer you either to our colleagues at the California Department of Education. I don't want to misspeak on that one, or even your local legal, whoever supports you, just for interpretation as well. Did we miss anything? I think you went into the purpose. You did. It was in your part, Aaron, just talking through how you could use it in so many different ways. We have seen it done. We've seen teachers go over and they just use, 5 items on an interim assessment, and then they have that submitted. Remember, it's really for learning. So, there's multiple ways to go over and use these tests. There isn't a right way to do it. There's standardized, there's not standardized, there's groups, just like Erin said. So many different ways to go over and use it.
There's one question, and I recommend this person contacting their success agent. It has to do with uh, the reading and writing ELPAC interims. And we know the writing needs to be hand scored, but my understanding is it should persist and be saved. And then the students can log in if there's an interruption. They could create another test session and they would. So my understanding is it might not be functioning properly and to contact your success agent if that's occurring. But again, as we've mentioned, the ELPAC interims are fairly new. And so, and so it might be something that, that I'm not aware of because I'm probably less familiar with the ELPAC interim assessments. But that would be something to contact your ETS success agent about. I'm looking through the questions and I think we've addressed most of the common questions that have come through.
I'm looking for the link for success agents, and
Oh, I'm so sorry. I know I mentioned them, but of course, Joe, he's going to save the day and put that in the chat.
how to find it. It was kind of funny, right?
Uh-huh.
There we go. All right, so it's in the chat now. And yeah, so one more question just came through about the questions that are being printed. Will they be the same as the questions that are on the interim assessment blocks? Yes, they will be. So the interim assessment blocks are different than the summative assessment. They're fixed form, so it's not adaptive. So item number 1 is going to be item number 1 next time. There's no shuffling, no changing of the questions. It's all going to be fixed form. That was a great question.
Yep. All right. All right. Well, I think that is all of the questions. I don't know. Keep them coming. And again, if your question didn't get answered, your success agent is probably the best person to go to for any questions related to the interims as you dive in and start using these and practice with students. So Paul, are we ready for
Sure, yeah,
to
unless
move forward?
another question comes through, because we probably have time for one more, but
Okay.
if nothing comes through, then yeah, we can just go ahead and wrap it up.
Okay.
All right, well, let's go ahead and wrap it up then. Well, thank you, everyone. Those were a lot of great questions, and thank you, Joe and Aaron. I love the show and tell. You could tell that that's just very helpful. All righty, so to wrap it up, we would like to recommend some upcoming training opportunities, and links to register are in the resource guide. First up, we have the upcoming new coordinator trainings, and those are one on November 21st, where the topic will be preparing for testing. And then December 12th is a continuation of preparing for testing. So that's the part 2 that Joe had mentioned earlier. And then in January, we will be covering support during testing and what that looks like. All righty, so mark your calendars and join us for the Results Are In, Now What webinar on January 29th, 2025. Bring your questions, as experts in the field will present what's new, as well as answer questions regarding the module series. And if you haven't already, please sign up for Assessment Spotlight emails. You can find subscription instructions in your resource guide. Also, for additional updates, follow the CDE on X at CDE Assessments. You can also connect with the CDE on Instagram. Links are in your resource guide. And that brings us to the end of today's training. We hope that the information we shared today was helpful and timely. As always, we want to remind you that you are not alone in this work. Please reach out through the networks of coordinators in similar roles throughout the state, your LEA success agents, and you always have staff at the CDE ready and available to answer your questions. Also, when you exit the Zoom, you'll be directed to a post-training evaluation. We would appreciate it if you can give us 3 minutes of your time. Your feedback is appreciated. And with that, on behalf of my colleagues, Joe Valero and Aaron Gordon and the CDE, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you at the next webinar. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Take good care.